Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Paul Robeson House of Princeton Board Program Committee Eslanda New virtual conversation and lunchtime chat with Dr. Barbra Ransby and Princeton University Generational African American Student Association. We are grateful that you have joined us today. I am your moderator, Dr. Joy Barnes-Johnson, Program Committee Chairperson for the Paul Robeson House of Princeton Board, and we appreciate your presence. Our hope is to make this a casual 45-minute conversation so that just on your lunch hour, not only are you able to feed your stomach and strengthen your body, but that your mind will be enriched by this wonderfully powerful opportunity to be in conversation across the generations in our discussion of Eslanda Good Robeson. This meeting is being recorded, and so we will ask that you remain muted throughout the session, so that we can maintain a higher quality of audio if you are not speaking directly. We have Kim Dorman of the Princeton Public Library working with me to help monitor the chat and facilitate discussion today. And so certainly if you feel like you would like to add comments to the chat, feel free. And we will get started in just a moment. Thank you again for coming. Again, welcome and thank you for joining us for our first virtual lunchtime chat with the Paul Robeson House of Princeton Board. My name is Dr. Joy Barnes-Johnson, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator for today's discussion. We would like to start with an acknowledgement. We are inhabiting the land of the Lenape peoples and appreciate the sacrifice that has been made throughout perpetuity so that we might live and have shelter. We acknowledge the labor of oppressed peoples all over the world who have committed without compensation to improve the quality of life that we are able to live on these inhabited lands. We acknowledge the love of the Paul Robeson House of Princeton founders, community members, and volunteers who have carried this vision for more than 25 years. The Paul Robeson House of Princeton initiative seeks to restore the historic home where Paul Robeson was born and adapt the property to purposes consistent with Robeson's transformational vision. Although many organizations and institutions honor aspects of Robeson's achievements, the Paul Robeson House of Princeton will be the first in New Jersey to focus exclusively on extending his human rights agenda into the 21st century. In keeping with Robeson's legacy of activism and social justice, the Robeson House will serve as an international resource for individuals and organizations who share Robeson's commitment to advocacy and human rights. The mission of the Paul Robeson House of Princeton is to promote social justice consistent with the values and actions of Princeton's native son, Paul Robeson. We will pause before we get started in a moment of silence and in solidarity with oppressed peoples all around the world. We call out Actions for Peace in Gaza, the Ukraine, the Congo, Haiti, and the United States, places where Paul and Eslanda Robeson, like Drew and Maria Luisa Bastille before them, laid a foundation for us to imagine freedom. Ashe. I'm your moderator, and with my colleague and friend Kim Dorman of the Princeton Public Library, we will try to facilitate this conversation. Today is about Eslanda Good Cordoza Robeson, the woman who led a large and unconventional life as Mrs. Paul Robeson. I am delighted to welcome today to our discussion Dr. Barbara Ransby and, excuse me, the Princeton University Generational African American Student Association. GAASA, as it is known, is here to build community among African American students and to celebrate the beauty of African American culture and identity. Dr. Barbara Ransby is the John D. MacArthur Chair and Distinguished Professor in the Departments of Black Studies, Gender and Women's Studies, and History at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She also directs the campus-wide Social Justice Initiative, a project that promotes connections between academics and community organizers doing work on social justice. SJI is currently hosting the Portal Project, a floating symposium on social, racial, and environmental justice involving nearly 200 artists, activists, and scholars. Dr. Ransby is a graduate of Columbia University and the University of Michigan, where she was a Mellon Fellow. It is time to start our conversations, and I am delighted. It's not often that you get an opportunity to actually spend time and speak to the author of such an incredible work. And so I'm going to kick off our conversation with a question. Why Eslanda? So I'm going to ask everyone to just sort of think about who Eslanda Robeson was and what you might know, and pose this question to Dr. Ransby. Dr. Ransby, why Eslanda Robeson?
Well, first of all, let me just thank you, Dr. Barnes-Johnson, and the students for giving me an opportunity to talk about Eslanda Robeson, for all the work you're doing at the Robeson House and for all the work the students are doing to make Princeton a better place, but more importantly, to make the world a better place. So that's very much in Eslanda Robeson's tradition. So why Eslanda of all the people I could write about? Well, I think any biographer starts with curiosity. So when I was an undergraduate, I did a paper on Eslanda, which was eventually published. And I just got a teaser, just a little bit of information about her life in doing that research. And I was always curious. So when I finished the Ella Baker book, I was thinking, what would I do next? I'm a historian by training. And Eslanda was someone who had been on my mind. She was on my mind because she did live such a fascinating life. And I thought, telling her story could keep me interested and engaged for several years in doing the research. But also the themes of her life were very much themes that resonated for me. Social justice, socialism, anti-imperialism, feminism, many of the things that she navigated. And she was also a writer, a scholar, an anthropologist. So, my curiosity about this woman who traveled all over the world, at a time that was very difficult for Black women, who carved out a principled stance during the Cold War and McCarthyism, who navigated this complicated marriage. In some ways, her life was irresistible, but it was also a story that hadn't been told. And she had sort of languished in the shadows of Paul Robeson. And as much as I respected him as a historical and political figure, as an artist, I just felt like Essie hadn't gotten her due. And so the biography was an effort to in a sense, give her due. So it was my own interest, my own curiosity, but it was also a story that was in need of telling. And so I spent a very long time researching her life and was happy to be able to write the biography. And I was very happy that Haymarket Books gave it a new lease on life with a new edition recently.
Yes. I mean, you open the Haymarket edition with a letter to Essie that begins, Essie, my dear, this there's some bad news in the world. It's still a mess. And Black people are still fighting for our freedom and up against some nasty and violent opposition. You would have cheered on the way young people who took to the streets. And at the time, I guess you were talking about Missouri, Ferguson, but then of course, as life unfolds, we could have easily been talking about 2020, 2021 as well. This phase of struggles is resistance to neocolonialism and neoliberalism, to corruption by new elites and collaborations with old ones. There are eloquent young voices speaking out against the pillage and polluting of the land and water. There are labor struggles and student protests and women campaigns. The radical tradition of Black women's resistance continues. When you wrote that, when I read that, I said, you're writing to people like the people that we have here today. And so I want to bring in some of the voices from GAASA, the Generational African American Student Association, so that they can be in conversation right now about all of these things. I think it's important to hear from them. And students, as you speak to this moment, what does it mean to have a radical voice today? Share with the community some of your thoughts about that. Tell us some of the work of GAASA. What are you doing?
Hello. My name is Anya Romeo. I am president of GAASA. Um, my coworkers, my peers on here, I'll let them introduce themselves very quickly.
Hi, I'm Maddie Isaac. I'm a co-political chair with GAASA.
Hi, I'm Jonna Richardson, and I am one of the political action chairs of GAASA.
Hi, I'm Erica. I'm the vice president of GAASA.
Yes. So the mission for GAASA, we started off 2 years ago, was to find a space for African American students to express and explore African American culture at Princeton University. This may be surprising for some, but the African American community at Princeton is actually quite small, and there's a higher population of Black students who come from immigrant families at elite institutions like Princeton University. So very often before GAASA, the African American experience was undermined and just hidden, and it wasn't getting the respect that it deserved. So our mission for GAASA is to tell Princeton University and the Princeton community that our presence is just as important as any other cultural or Black affinity space on campus. And our goals are to help the African American community in the process as well. I'm going to turn it over to my political action chair so they can talk a bit more about some of the things that we're trying to do to help celebrate and emphasize African American culture.
Thanks, Anya, and thank you, Dr. Joy, for the question. To answer about what does it mean to use or to have a radical voice, we think what GAASA has been trying to do in the time that we've been established at Princeton is to bring visibility to the stories of African Americans, generational African Americans who have been at Princeton in the town and in Princeton University. And we're even expanding our goal to look at African American history and heritage in the state of New Jersey. And so we think that in a contemporary time when there is a lot of silence and intentional silence and miseducation about Black history and American history, what we think it is to be radical is to be truthful and to correct false narratives or to bring light to things where there's darkness. And so we honestly think it's amazing when we find out that there's a Black community in Princeton that our classmates don't know about it. Or when we find out that Paul Robeson, we share the same space as he once lived here, and folks at our school don't know about it. And so what we want to do is even if our administration does not encourage those conversations, or they don't willingly talk about their history with African American people, what we're doing is being radical by taking it upon ourselves to connect with folks in our community, and to create partnerships and to educate ourselves and do the work of letting those who we go to school with know about it as well.
Thank you, Jonna. I also want to add, we're also doing a genealogy kind of initiative, because obviously a big part of being African American is not knowing where you're coming from, and so trying to find your roots. So that's like another thing that we're trying to do, is work with the resources that we have at the university, whether it's Ancestry or our librarians, to encourage students and give them the tools to essentially do research on their own families and learn about themselves, and kind of empower them, because I think learning about your own history motivates you to do better in this present moment. So
Yes. Yes, excellent. I think that's the key, to take a moment and pause and be reflective. I don't think that people understand, certainly how younger people who have access to so much information can still not know. And I think what you're talking about is the direct intent to keep certain people and voices invisible, render them silent. And that is what Dr. Ransby, in effect, is saying also, right? You can be overshadowed. And so I'd like to think also about, again, what this actually means to be overshadowed, and how and invite Dr. Ransby back into the conversation. In doing the research for this book, you spent time in the archives, and I just read I'm listening to an incredible book about archival research in Black feminist narratives, especially from chattel slavery to the present, and how that also is part of the intention to keep the love of Black women sort of out of the space. What was it like for you, and how would you, as students, think about research around a topic where viscerally you have a response and sort of a knowledge that the whole story is not being told? What do you do when you're trying to figure out what the whole story is?
So let me preface I'll answer your question directly, but let me preface it by saying this. First of all, it is important to know, and, there's always a fight over history. It's not just what happened, it's who gets to tell the story, through whose lens, and all of that. But it's also not just enough to know, because knowing is interesting. It can be empowering, but what do we do with that power? And I think, the challenge of Black women's feminist and radical politics has been to be forces for transformative change. So how do we use what we know in the world where we are? How do we use the past to impact the now? And we have a very urgent moment right now on so many levels, because not only is it the ongoing sort of white supremacist suppression of knowledge about Blackness and Black people, but we also have an active political agenda coming out of Florida, notoriously, the suppression of critical race theory, the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, it is a very pointed political agenda. So study and knowing is important. And I've always described myself as a scholar activist, because I think the obligation of scholars and researchers is not just to share, but to do. And so I hope, we bring that into the conversation very much in the spirit of Ella Baker. In terms of the archives, I'm kind of old school. I like going in the archives and looking at the actual documents, but we are in a digital era, and a lot of archives are digitally available now. That is paper archives have been digitized. But then there's a digital archive. My last book was Making All Black Lives Matter. And I couldn't do that book without looking at the archive of social media, looking at the archive of texts and emails, to the degree that I had access to them, and I had access to quite a few. So I think we're in a whole new era in terms of digital archives. But even in the old way of doing historical research, going in dusty manuscript collections and so forth, the questions you ask will lead you to different places. And one thing I found about Eslanda, for example, many people were interested in Paul Robeson, great artist, great stage actor, large human being, I mean, physically towering, beautiful man, who cast a very large shadow. And many people who were researching Paul got up to the point where Essie came into the picture and sort of stopped there. Okay, we got what we need, job done. So in the very same archive, writers and historians were extracting different narratives. There's actually a photograph of them, which I sometimes show when I do a slide presentation. And it appears in other books about Paul. And Essie is in the photograph and it gets cropped right there, leaving her out, which is very symbolic of how she was sort of footnoted in what was very much a partnership in their relationship, both a political partnership, and a familial partnership. So yeah, archives are important. They're political. People say about biographies, just tell it like it was. Just tell. You never tell everything. You can't. I mean, she lived, 6+ decades. It's not a transcript of her life. So I made choices about what was important and what wasn't. So I had to be selective in the archives in telling that story. And every biographer, every writer does that. And you do it through a certain lens. So I did it in trying to center her voice and trying to recuperate that story, recover that story from the sort of annals or margins of history. And it was just, it was a fascinating journey. The archival work I love. The writing work is hard because you have to leave out stuff. But I'm just really pleased that it found a readership, and particularly when young Black women, are reading it, I feel particularly rewarded by that.
Me too, Dr. Ransby, because I picked it up with my life here in Princeton as an educator. I teach at the high school and I spend time going to lectures and things at the university and often wondering, what is the experience like for Black students on campus? And so to our students, tell us about this search to find yourself. I love Dr. Ruha's books, all of them, but in her newest book, Imagination Manifesto, she's talking specifically about the creative process. As a student, how do you create this world that we need to be in, this space that we need to be in? How do you do it? Because I can talk about through Dr. Ransby and the other work that I've done about Eslanda Robeson, how she did it. She was just like, you know what? Let me just travel, right? What's it like for you to create this world that you feel like you need?
I think that question ties in really nicely with the other question of archival work, just because, as you said earlier, we have technology at our hands. And I think in order to create the world you want, you have to know how to look into history, how to look and read through the fine lines and see where things may have not been painted as they actually were. I'm actually really interested in just exploring this idea of archival work just a bit more, because I think that every young person of this generation has to do it in order to create a world that we want for ourselves in the future. Looking at GAASA and all the encampments going on, Princeton University students, we looked back at our archives and we looked to the ones who did sit-ins before us, the ones who did encampments before us, to learn how we should go about doing it. But I guess my question to you, Dr. Ransby, is choosing what parts of history are the proper parts of history to follow or take from. You said you had to choose bits and pieces of Eslanda's story to create your book, but how did you know which pieces were the right pieces? I don't know. I think there's an importance in our actions now, because one day future generations will look back to us and we'll be a part of an archive. Um, so I don't know. I just want to make sure that our generation is learning from the right part. So if you could just give any words on that, I think that would be very helpful to the younger generation.
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, I could nerd out about archives, but I won't go so deep into that. But absolutely. But here's the thing. There's not a formula and there's not a right way to tell the story. There's an honest way to tell the story. And I'm upfront about what I wanted to know. I didn't want to do a sensationalist biography. I wanted to respect the sensibilities of the subject. And I wanted to ask questions that I felt I needed to know and this generation needed to know to understand her place in history. So there were a lot of things. I did talk about her marriage. There were, lots of other personal things that might have made for more tantalizing reading, but that wasn't my intent or my purpose. And I was upfront and honest about that. I was also upfront and honest about my own political, loyalties. So you mentioned another stream of history, which I do want to say something about. I mean, it's kind of symbolic and beautiful that the name of your organization is GAASA, and the landmass of Gaza is so much on our minds and in our hearts right now. I just wrote a piece for The Guardian with a colleague and comrade, Omar Barghouti, about my experience as a student activist at Columbia in the 1980s. And I was very much involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And we held an encampment. We built shanties on campuses to illustrate apartheid in South Africa, the racist colonial system that existed until the early 1990s. There was also the year I graduated from Columbia. Many of my dear friends had a blockade of Hamilton Hall, which was the site of Heinz Hall, for the Gaza Solidarity Encampment. And Omar Barghouti, who became a friend and was a classmate, was a Palestinian student at that time. And so many of us in the Black student movement felt a great affinity for the struggle of the Palestinian people. And many Jewish students do too, by the way. People try to distort, like, this is a political question. It's not an ethnic question. It's not a religious question. It's a political question. So the Black student movement was very inspired by the struggle of Palestinian people and vice versa. Right now, every campus I look at, from UC Irvine to Emory to NYU, Columbia, and Princeton, Black students and Black faculty are standing up because it's standing on the right side of history. So just putting that out there, we can't, we speak about history in the context of the time that we're in. And so sometimes, people talk about the Black freedom movement of the 20th century or the anti-war movement of the 1960s. We have struggles to fight right now, battles to fight, injustices to scream about. And I'm glad that this generation of young people are doing that. So yeah, there are no right questions to ask. There are honest questions. And I think if you work hard in telling a story and are honest about why you want to tell it, that readers will benefit from it.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things so in the schools, the public schools, we created a racial literacy program, and we sought to expand the conversation about race so that people understand the institutional ways that people are harmed when they are dehumanized. And we've asked them to look at history by examining it as a triple read, because even you right now are reading this moment in a lens that's shaped by social media influence, by other news outlets and journalistic ways of representation, but then your own experiences of being oppressed peoples. The idea that you are honing in on the fact that you are African American, not of immigrant status, or cannot trace your history beyond the institution of chattel slavery is, I think, really important. And so that's what we want people to be doing, to do what I call form a knowledge, right? You take all the things like a kaleidoscope and you examine multiple perspectives. You allow your wonderings, your questions, you're like, wait a minute, could that really be real? What's actually happening there? And then you take the obvious things that are just like, yeah, I know what it feels like. And you allow yourself to be oppressed and you allow yourself to live in that space and say, no, you're not going to gaslight me in this moment and tell me that this is not what I'm experiencing. Right. And so all of those things shaped together will allow you to create an important perspective as if you ascend a mountain and look over. And so we have about 15 minutes before we would like to actually wrap and take some questions from the chat. So I'll say to our audience, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will, in a few moments, spend some time sort of navigating your questions with our panelists. But so panelists, I'm gonna pose this thing, right? And I'll say that, yeah, I think I know how some of you feel, but not all of you. And so I'd say that words like justice and equity are abused and contradictory when we think about them in our current society. What words do you think we should use to describe the work of creating space for human dignity in the world? If everybody could think about that and say, okay, and even to our audience, this will allow some participation. What words do you think we need to use beside justice, beside equity, beside diversity, beside inclusion, right? To challenge ourselves as forward-thinking individuals to do better with this work.
Well, I don't want to overshadow the students, so I'm interested to hear what words resonate for them. And again, back to, you know, the Anja's question. You know, there's not a right answer. It's like the words resonate for a meaning, for a reason, and the meaning gets, you know, infused into the word through our practice, right? And how we live and how we move in the world. So I'm very curious to hear what words resonate for you.
I think the first word that I think of is student. I mean, we're forever learning, we're forever taking in new perspectives. Yes, right now I'm a student at Princeton University, but you know, well beyond the time I graduate, I'll still continue to learn new things, to hopefully continue looking at the archives, learning about my history, about other people's history, because the only way to like make, you know, change and to make progress in the future is to understand our history and understand what we've been through, and different things like that. So I think of the word student.
Adding on to what Erica said, I think the word presence, because I definitely agree that words like equity and justice and equality are kind of often overused and their like actual meaning is undercut by politicians who are using them in this disingenuous way. But for me, when I think about the word presence, it's about like acknowledging the historical presence, like the same thing that we did at the beginning about acknowledging land, labor, and love, but also just people who are here today and what they need, um, and just acknowledging everyone's humanity.
Any other takers?
I wanted to say truth because I think at the end of the day, that's what we're all looking for. At every protest, I don't know, every book written, we're trying to get to the truth of a point. But I think truth is also just as complicated as justice and equity because truth sometimes depends on the perspective. So I think I'm going to switch out my word of truth with my word of humility and humanity. I think humans are most beautiful when you're able to connect with them on such a basic level of just hope and desire and pain. And I think that's what is behind every movement. I don't know. I think if things were centered more around the humanity of things, we'd make more progress.
That was poetic.
Yeah, those are great words. I think what I would say would probably be peace making and peace building. And I also think access is really important as well. I think one of the things that that plagues us or hinders us is that we don't have access to the information, to the knowledge, to the people, the resources that we need. And that creates barriers, and it also creates like different, yeah, it just creates barriers to reaching your full potential. And I think that some of the work that GAASA is doing, and Dr. Ransby, and even the Paul Robeson House of Princeton, is to create access for scholars, for activists, for youth who are passionate about this work. And so I think that's what resonates with me.
Yeah, I think all those are powerful words. And, you know, Dr. Joy Barnes-Johnson started us off with, these are, you know, words that are problematized, words that can be co-opted, words that are contested. But you know what? All words are too. So I say that as a preface. For me, I guess 3 words, and I don't want to let go of justice. No matter how it gets pulled and distorted and contorted, I want to hold on to it. But for me, freedom, liberation, and justice are 3 very powerful words that I come back to. Freedom, because I think our desire for greater freedom as individuals propels us into the work of liberation, which is a process, and it's a collective process. And we have to want collective freedom, because some people feel quite free. You know, some people walk around feeling quite free, and it's at the expense of other people feeling unfree. So, so collective freedom, the process of collective liberation, which is work. It's quite beautiful work, but it's work. And then thirdly, justice, which is where we want to arrive at, but justice for all. And that sounds like a bumper sticker, but you know, it requires us to interrogate, what does that mean? You know, what is a just transition? What is a just outcome? What is a just society? And how are we behave to one another in a way that embraces and embodies justice? So you know, again, lawyers have definitions of justice, and our justice system is often quite unjust and unfair. So it's not something that's dictated by a formula or by even how systems organize. It's a concept that is always aspirational. We're always trying to achieve a greater justice. So those words are very special to me. And I always think, you know, in my writing and in my activism, you know, am I embodying these words in my work? And how well am I doing that?
Well, okay. So I love, shout out to Tara Hunter, shout out to Ruha Benjamin here. And there are so many that I won't do that, but there's so many people whose work that I'm thinking about, but particular, I'm thinking about Erica Alexander when she described the Trayvon generation. I'm thinking about Patricia Hills Collins when she just describes what it means to be a Black feminist and as a methodology. I'm thinking about Ruha Benjamin when she describes weathering. And, you know, from my background in science and what it means to be weathered and how you can just get worn down. And so I think that that everything that all of you have said makes perfect sense. But our last question that I'm going to formally ask before we start taking some of the questions from our chat is this. Because again, I'm thinking about the Trayvon generation and being called the Trayvon generation, and that would be anyone who was alive when Trayvon Martin or impacted by Trayvon Martin's murder. And I'm thinking about how you all, the only president that you knew at that moment was Barack Obama. So you have Barack Obama, 45, and what we got now, right? And so here's the question. How does what a generation is called shape the ways that they think? And this is to everyone on the panel, including Dr. Ransby, who I'm guessing is a baby boomer, maybe, a seasoned millennial with your use of technology. But how do we navigate this thing that we have to put labels on things and groups of people, and how that shapes the way we think? Y'all like this. Dr. Joy, what? What?
Well, yeah, labeling is, when we write, when we form a slogan at a demonstration, when we give a speech, when we answer a question, it is all about labeling a reality, and no word can capture fully. And so how well does it capture? I mean, the Trayvon generation was a powerful, evocative frame that included and excluded, right? We had a situation here in Chicago with Rukia Boyd, who's a young woman who was also killed in an instance of racist violence. And so, the focus on Trayvon, does that also include women, and how Black women have been victims of both state and vigilante violence? So we have to always, embrace and interrogate at the same time. So that naming is very important. In the work I do, the work I did on Ella Baker or Eslanda Robeson, what you title a book, what you say about the movements they were a part of. Do I say civil rights movement or Black freedom movement? How do we see African-American identity in the context of Black internationalism and Black people as diasporic people? So all of these framings, I think, are very political, very important, and, take us to different places, I would say. So, thank you for that question. And I'm resisting a neat answer to it, but I'm curious as to what my co-panelists want to say.
Who's gonna take it on?
Well, I think this is an interesting question, especially because thinking about possibilities for myself as a young person and what I thought I could achieve. Obviously, I grew up, and the president who I knew was President Barack Obama, and now I'm doing things that no one in my entire family has ever done. I'm the first person to ever go to an Ivy League institution, like in all of my family history, which is something remarkable to note. And I think that I say that because, like, when we think of how we call ourselves or what other people call us, our desire to conform or to resist those labels, I think we are defined by them so much as we want to be. And so I could have been also defined by my family background, or where what I had access to and what I didn't growing up. And I think that what our generation is doing now is doing the work of reclaiming a lot of things as well, and reinterpreting things that have once been used, weaponized against us. And so I think that's a lot of what we also see, weaponization of certain terms, but also reclaiming a lot of those things as well.
That's all I can say. It's amazing how we are already at the mark that we had set to end our conversation. I want to first just say thank you, you all. Your brilliance. I need sunglasses even at home, for all of the brilliance that people are commenting about in the chat. And I think it would be really problematic for me if I didn't stop and just say thank you, thank you, thank you for all of the things. A couple of the questions I was able to answer in the chat And so I want to say, yes, this is being recorded, and it will take a little bit of work for us to get it up online. So it should be up online before the week is out, and we will share a lot of the resources that we shared. I was in the process of helping to respond to Gail's question about, I'm gonna go back actually, Gail's question about where Eslanda was when she was in the Congo. And I will simply say that her African journey, the book, My African Journey, records a lot of that work where she's talking about what she was able to do when she was in Africa. And so please, it's available online. When you get the materials, I'll share the link in the chat now. But when you get the materials, and a lot of them are available, certainly please feel free to access tools there as well. That is one of the things I would agree, Dr. Ransby. COVID allowed access to so many digital materials that exist, that it was just magnificent for those of us who nerd out on things like that. So there, I noticed in the chat that our board president, our executive director, and our vice president have joined. So I would like to officially acknowledge Ben Colbert, Randy Wiggins, and Denise Leslie, as they are the ones that are helping to drive a lot of the conversations that we're able to have. But let's see. I see a question in the chat. What surprised you most about Eslanda in your research about her life? And can you share one thing you left out of your book on her life, and why?
Oh, gosh. What surprised me the most? Well, I mean, just to build off of what Joy was holding up in terms of the travel, when we think of someone who, she first goes to the continent of Africa in 1936. She goes to Uganda, South Africa. She stays in Uganda for a period of time. She passes on the coast of Africa. She keeps this detailed journey. She goes there soon after Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. So, that she is occupying this space and going into really uncertain terrain. She's traveling through colonial Africa, right? The continent has been colonized by various European powers through violence, and she is, as a Black woman, traveling through this space pretty fearlessly. Now, she did have a certain amount of class privilege, and she had contacts and all that. I don't know if it surprised me so much as it humbled me, of the risks that we think that we're taking to do the work that we do, that she was prepared to take risks, to tell a story. She traveled under circumstances where she was on tiny little planes when she was in the Congo, and she had to leave some of her belongings in villages along the way because the planes got smaller and smaller, and she could take less and less with her. So those aspects of her story, fascinated me. What did I leave out? Well, she was a colorful character, let's just say. Unlike Ella Baker, she kept a diary and a journal, extensive diaries and journals, which are at the Moreland Spingarn Library in DC at Howard. And she was very candid about what she thought about people, and sometimes it wasn't that flattering. After an evening together, she would comment on how smart she thought they were, how, what they were wearing, what, this, that, and the other. And, some of it is funny. But I didn't think that really captured what she had to contribute to our historical understanding. So I left some of that out, but it was interesting and amusing to me and gave me some insights into her personality.
I 100% agree. I think that the complexity of Eslanda Robeson is something that comes through in the book in such a brilliant way. And you create pathways and doorways for us to go and explore more. And I appreciate that. Based on the first couple of chapters, I'm a Delta. And so I was like, wait a minute, what? Wait, what? So I've actually launched this whole thing in my brain to understand what it was like for her to be a Delta at that point in the history of the organization. And you can actually see these trails. So spending time in the archives is a gift. And you gave us a magnificent gift by sharing what you did. So right now, because I promise I am one of these people that tries to stick to time as I describe it. And so I'm going to launch a 3-question poll and ask folks to share some insight with us about yourselves so that we know how to continue to design our programs and develop all the things. With that also, I am going to make a couple of quick announcements and get ready to say, I hope you enjoyed your lunchtime chat with us. The Paul Robeson House of Princeton Board and Advisory committees will be in town at the Juneteenth celebration in the Morvan Museum Municipal Lot area on June 19th. And participating as a partner. So if you would like to stop by and say hello, we will certainly be there. We also hope to engage in conversations about Eslanda the book this summer for a virtual book club. So if you would like to participate in conversation, certainly please do that. One of the more or lesser known works where Eslanda, and I'll pull it back, Eslanda and Paul were both in, oh wait, did I? They were together here in 1930 in Borderline, which was a silent film that has been rescored with jazz music. And we will actually feature it in our podcast coming up this in June for Black Music Month. And so there will be an opportunity to sort of play around with that as well. But you can find us online at Facebook, Instagram. Our podcast is on Spotify. And as I mentioned earlier, this conversation will be posted on our YouTube channel in the days to come. I am grateful for all the things. Dr. Ransby, to Anya, to Jonna, to Erica, to Maddie. This conversation, I think you can see in the chat, people appreciate the candid ways in which you responded to the questions. And I know that I am grateful that you thought it not robbery to spend time with us, to share your thoughts about what it means to do the work of Black feminist activism and serve as scholar activists
Thank you.
throughout your career.
Thank you so much for having me and for your leadership. And I see very many familiar names and faces in the audience. I want to give a shout out to Anthony Arnov, who initially, was urging me to come. I couldn't come, but I'm glad I was able to do it this way. And of course, Naomi Murakawa and my colleagues Ruha and Tara and Lorhia, just, wonderful to be virtually in the community of the scholarly and the activist community of Princeton. So thank you for having me. Thank you for your curiosity about Eslanda, and let me know in any way I can support your work going forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ransby. And so we will close with a few words from our co-founder, Ben Colbert, and our board vice president, Denise Leslie.
Well, I'll speak first because I was surprised to be asked to speak. Thank you so much, Dr. Ransby. Thank you to the students. I was very invigorated to hear all the things you had to say. I love the whole story of how courageous Eslanda was, and in fact that she began and got Paul involved with a lot of the international work that he did, and particularly on the continent. So, and I also took my hat to Dr. Joy Barnes-Johnson for creating this wonderful space for all of us to get together. Ben?
Go ahead and unmute yourself, Ben.
Is that better?
Yes.
I would just again reiterate how much we really appreciated the opportunity to meet and hear Dr. Ransby. I think that the actual conversation only inspires us to want to do more, to hear more. I think this was an excellent first start, and I'm hoping maybe we can in the future have you come and visit with us, because we would really enjoy the opportunity to work with you one-on-one or in a group. So thank you, and also to thank you to Dr. Joy and the students for initiating and setting forth this program. We're very appreciative of you. Thank you very much.
And finally, let's call this our official introduction of the Princeton University or Princeton community, officially and formally, of our executive director, Mr. Randolph Wiggins. If you would, please close this out.
Thank you, Dr. Joy. These opportunities to have cross-generational conversations, I think, are truly priceless. And one of the things that I encourage the young people to do is to look super critically at the history of what's happened on our campus, and to understand what the drivers were for wins, not just on our side, but on the sides of folks who are doing things that we may not necessarily agree with. And I encourage us all to be hypercritical, hyper vigilant, and to truly understand those drivers, because that's going to be the way that we think about things differently and have a real chance to change things, not just now, but for decades from now when young people are looking at us. We want to say that we literally were able to turn the tide. So that's my closing message there, and happy to stay connected. Thank you all for your time. Dr. Ransby, this has been phenomenal. Thank you so much. For the young people at GAASA, thank you for everything that you're doing on campus, and let's keep it going. Thank you so much.
So it is with that, I would like to officially say thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. I see members of the Black Voices Book Club. I see members of our other alliance organizations. I see Dr. Jackie Flemings, who is a fan forever. I appreciate your presence today. Oh, and Wanda Gakandi is also online. We have a commissioned quilt that the Sankofa Stitchers of New Jersey created that features a patch that's dedicated to Eslanda. And we hope when our house opens in 2025, you will all come visit and break bread as we celebrate the lives and legacy of the Robesons. Everyone, peace be to you and your family, health and wellness always. We thank you for your time today, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.